I wonder if President Trump ran for the wrong job, because he seems to really want to be mayor. I mean, if he really wants to deal with the streets, he should have run with mayor. He wants to run against Mamdani, he should have run for mayor. I'd rather he focus on the economy. I'd rather he focus on Gaza and bringing peace. I'd rather he focus on Ukraine. But this country does not want militarizing the streets. And by the way, have you noticed St. Louis and Memphis, two of the highest crime areas? No talk there. Why? Because they're Republican governors. He's only doing this with Democratic governors. So it's unconstitutional, and it's not focused on what the American people elected him to do.
It definitely is constitutional. In fact, the United States Supreme Court ruled in 1827 in Martin versus Mott that it was up to the president to decide when such an emergency existed that would justify using the National Guard or the militia locally and domestically. And it said specifically that whenever a constitutional right of a group of citizens is at stake, that would constitute an emergency. I think when I look at these democratic cities where people are afraid to leave their homes, where their property is constantly at risk, where they can't even walk their children to school or get on a subway, their constitutional rights are at risk.
With a Republican governor.
I don't know. I live in D.C. I don't know who else in this table is. I'm not scared to walk my kids to school. They're actually terrorizing families right now. There was a phone call. Let me tell you what happened. There was a phone call about 1 hour ago with 200 moms who are livid that they are terrorizing immigrant children and families on their way to school. And you're sitting here and saying
I live in New York City, and I
do not live in Washington, D.C., so you don't know.
I do know, and I look at the crime statistics in Chicago, in New Orleans, where in fact the Trump administration has been welcomed to bring in troops. And it's clear that these Democratic-run cities, the politicians have turned their backs on people, mostly people of color and poorer people in those cities who are the ones who can't afford security, and their lives are at risk. And I think it's an outrage.
So what about the citizens in Republican-run cities that are under the same constitutional infringements, per the statistics that you're quoting?
I think
when does the invasion start in those cities?
I think that they should. In fact, wherever a city...
Tennessee, where about Missouri?
Yes, wherever a city fails to provide
the cities that are run by Democrats,
security of its citizens,
cities that are run by
the president
Democrats,
is justified to do this. Read the
He's
decision.
only going after the Democratic governors.
The cities that are run by Democrats, we know, are the problem. Okay, you can talk about Republican states, but it's the cities. And D.C. changed their laws to try to limit the ability to put anyone under the age of 25 into jail. They released them nonstop for crimes, and crimes are down. Violent crimes are down over 50% since Trump did this. Okay, so it's working, and I don't believe that the National Guard, by the way, is getting tired. It's been a couple of weeks. So I don't believe that story. I don't think it's real. And I think that it's working. And the fear is for Democrat cities is that he might roll this out across the board. And then all of a sudden you see crime drop everywhere. And then what do they say?
Well,
they're going to say, "Oh my gosh, well, maybe
we can't roll this out across the board." We know that for a fact. But
no,
hold
on,
he
can roll it out.
You cannot.
If you read the decision.
Hold on a second.
The Ninth Circuit is going to reverse Judge Breyer and rule exactly that.
Use the same authority. What he did in D.C., he can only do because D.C. is a federal
city. That is untrue.
If he is going to do it in other,
read the Supreme Court decision.
If he is going to do it in other parts of the country, he's going to have to use different authorities, and it's going to be a different bar that is set there. I'm not saying it is impossible, but it's not going to be as easy as it was in D.C.
It is not unconstitutional.
Now, on that story that you're saying is fake, let me read a little bit more from what it says. One soldier from Tennessee told his father that from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m. every day, his only task is to walk around Chinatown. During a call to his wife, a guardsman from Louisiana said there was confusion about what the military was actually doing there. We haven't gotten critically low on morale, but we're falling fast, said one soldier who, like others quoted for the story, spoke to CNN on the condition of anonymity. One of the reasons that you're getting comments like this is because that is actually the predicament that the National Guard in particular is in. They are there, and they're a force, they're in uniform, so perhaps that's a deterrent, but they are limited in what they can do. I mean, this is according to the Army themselves, that their mission is to provide a visible presence in key areas as a deterrent. They can't arrest, they can't search, they can't direct law enforcement. So there are limits here, and there are costs, and I just wonder how long will we do this? How long will we have them there as sort of mascots to public safety when that is almost like a shortcut to actually dealing with the underlying problem, it seems.
At the time that Donald Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act, he justified it by saying that undocumented immigrants and asylum seekers coming to our country were engaged in an act of war. Even worse in that clip we just played for you. But his declaration to use a centuries-old wartime act was just rejected by a federal appeals court, the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans, who ruled against him in a 2-to-1 decision. The majority writing this, quote, "A country's engaging its residents and citizens to enter this country illegally is not the modern-day equivalent of sending an armed, organized force to occupy, to disrupt, or otherwise harm the United States. There is no finding that this mass immigration was an armed, organized force or forces," end quote. Now, the ruling by the appeals court with a conservative majority is the first time federal appellate judges have weighed in on whether Donald Trump properly invoked the law. And the ruling against him now means that the issue is likely to make its way to the United States Supreme Court. Legal Alert, who argued this case for the ACLU in front of the appeals court, said this, quote, "This ruling makes clear that the courts are there to keep the executive branch within legal limits, and that even the president cannot simply declare an emergency whenever it suits him." In fact, in April, we learned that Trump's own intelligence agencies found that his basis for invoking the law actually did not exist. From the AP's reporting at the time, quote, "A new U.S. intelligence assessment found no coordination between Tren de Aragua and the Venezuelan government, contradicting statements that Trump administration officials have made to justify their invocation of the Alien Enemies Act and deporting Venezuelan migrants." As for this latest ruling by the appeals court, the New York Times reports this, quote, "That finding could have legal and political implications given that Trump has used claims that immigrants are invading the U.S. not only to justify his use of extraordinary laws like the Alien Enemies Act, but also to devise a broader anti-immigration narrative. And as of lately, Donald Trump is not only losing on the issue of immigration, he's coming up against several other legal guardrails. A federal judge just said his use of military troops in Los Angeles was illegal. Another federal appeals court reinstated a Democrat on the Federal Trade Commission who Donald Trump had fired. And on Friday, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit ruled that Donald Trump does not have the authority to impose tariffs, his tariffs. Yesterday, he mentioned that he would ask the U.S. Supreme Court today to take up that case. We are still waiting to hear if he's done so. And breaking just in the last few minutes, another big legal blow to Donald Trump. A federal judge has ruled that the Trump administration broke the law when it froze billions of dollars in research funds at Harvard University. This is where we start the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Democracy Docket founder Mark Elias is here. Also joining us, former Democratic Senator, MSNBC political analyst Claire McCaskill's here, and former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the Department of Justice, Mary McCord, is here. Mary, let me start with you. Donald Trump invoking the Alien Enemies Act was always outrageous and audacious, and we knew that they knew that because they first put the squeeze on their own intelligence and national security agencies when the facts didn't bear out the predicate they needed for the act itself. Just talk about the impact of both the difficulty they had at the time with their own administration and now a legal roadblock to doing what Donald Trump clearly wants to do.
Well, I think, what we're going to start seeing now, the Trump administration has a lot of wins in the emergency docket, and now we're getting substantive rulings by higher courts of appeals, not just the district courts, and that's no shade on the district court judges. They're doing a fantastic job. But we're getting 3 judge panels ruling against Donald Trump, and it shows that the strategy of do what you want without worrying about whether it's lawful or supported by the facts is going to eventually come around and result in some of these types of decisions. And, you know, it was exposed to all of us, the efforts that were made to try to get an intelligence assessment that would actually back up the president's factual findings in that proclamation. And that was story enough and a big enough deal. This is a really big deal here. We have in a 2-to-1 opinion out of the conservative Fifth Circuit with a conservative George W. Bush appointee writing for the majority, taking issue, interpreting the Alien Enemies Act and saying, even if we accept the president's factual findings in the proclamation, even if we don't question those do not amount to an invasion or predatory incursion, and certainly we're not in a situation of a declared war. And the Judge Southwick, who wrote this opinion, concurred in by Judge Ramirez, what carefully went back through history. It's a very originalist opinion, goes back to the meaning of different terms throughout history, seeks all kinds of sources to interpret what those terms means, and says, even giving the president the benefit of doubt on and complete deference on the factual findings, that doesn't meet the criteria. This is a big deal, and I think this is something that, if and when the administration does take this to the Supreme Court, and if they take it, it will be really putting them to the task if they want to find differently, because it's a very well-reasoned, very thought-out opinion by that court.
Mark Elias, the piece that I never can get my brain around in trying to understand not just what they're doing, but why they're doing it, is that there is such enormous power. There's enormous power to seal the border, enormous power in the area of deportations. President Barack Obama, I think, deported more people than any administration before him. Why do you think the Trump administration turns to illegal justifications and explanations?
Yeah, and don't forget, they also control Congress. So to the extent they needed new legal authority, they actually control the branch of government that would give it to them in a heartbeat. Donald Trump resorts to illegal behavior for the same reason that Willie Sutton robbed banks, because that is where the power is. Donald Trump does not want to operate within the law because he thinks the law is for suckers. He thinks the Constitution is just a bunch of faded ink on old documents. He aspires to be Vladimir Putin. He aspires to be Kim Jong-un, someone who operates outside the law by design, struts his power by showing that the law doesn't apply to him. And that's why, these court rulings are so important, and they're why they are so unnerving to him, because the fact is Donald Trump has now lost 130 plus cases in district and court of appeals, and even a few in the Supreme Court around the country. And that is a constant reminder to him that he is not all powerful, and that at least the courts, if not the Republicans in Congress, will hold him accountable. There are only 3 things, Nicole, right now that he cares a lot about. One is deploying the military, and as you just point out, he just lost this very important case in the Fifth Circuit. The second is to attack free and fair elections, and he has been losing those lawsuits as well. And then the third is the Epstein files, and today he is suffering some real setbacks there. And all 3 of those operate as constraints and reminders to him of the constraints on his power, and it is important that the courts back up all 3.
Claire McCaskill, a lot of the story of the second Trump presidency is about the ways in which it differs from the first one, because comparing him to anyone normal is essentially pointless. Comparing his immigration conduct to the first one is almost equally pointless, because you could argue in the first term that there were people with respect for the rule of law, sort of, I guess, up to the point where they started carrying out child separation, which was ruled by a Republican-appointed judge as child abuse. But the policies are so flagrantly designed around cruelty. They're operationalized to terrorize. And they also happen to be politically unpopular. Donald Trump has some of his lowest approval ratings around immigration, and I believe it's why immigration is now wrapped up in lies about crime. What is the best way to push back for the Democratic Party?
Well, first of all, there's a couple of things. I do think it's important to remember that Trump ran on deporting people, but he always talked about it in the context of deporting criminals, rapists and murderers and drug dealers. And what America is finding out is that's not what he's doing. He is trying to reach a number quota forced upon him by the guy who I think has in some ways more power than Donald Trump, and that is Stephen Miller. Stephen Miller has set a number quota, and that's what Tom Homan is doing. He is trying to get X number of bodies on planes, don't care where, don't care whether you're trying to go to court and legally find a way to stay in this country. Doesn't matter that you're trying to play by the rules, even if you might have come across the border without legal documentation. He just wants to get people out of the country, a certain number. And that's not popular. And it's not going to be popular. And I think I really want to underline one of the points that Mary made. I mean, people come up to me in airports and grocery stores and wherever I go, and they grab my arm and they go, "Are we going to be okay?" And I tell them I believe the courts will hold. I believe the courts will hold because clearly Congress is failing. They've given up their power. The Republicans in Congress have given up their power, and Donald Trump has twisted the Constitution and statutory language to the point it's unrecognizable. So now the ball's in Robert's court. And what Mary emphasized in this opinion, I think this judge was very particular about the way he wrote this opinion, saying there was no war here, there was no invasion, in that he did originalist opinion. He talked about the language and the history and the context. And if you remember, that is what the court held their hat on in the gun case. You know, that Clarence Thomas wants to talk about the original meaning of the words. Well, he is now presenting them with an opinion that's going to be very hard for them to wiggle around. And so Roberts is worried about his legacy. Well, he's got a chance here. He's got a chance to stand up and say, no, we're not going to let the president declare a military emergency when there isn't one.
Mary,